the panel that we have today, which is fantastic, with some a mixture of experiences that we have within the tech world. And I'll let them introduce themselves and kind of give you a little bit of background, but it's anywhere from both someone who's both worked in a major tech company, works at a major school essentially, or a training facility, ability to be able to those that want to code, those want to learn, those that want to get into tech on the very beginning stages, also through the advanced, and then also a developer and co-founder herself. So we'll let them all kind of introduce, but the topic today is Hire Like a Girl, what it takes to not only look for or how to hire for a diverse team, but what it means to, what skill sets and other things that you need to do as a woman to be hired. So we're going to try to touch on it on both levels. We'll let the panel run for a little bit. We'll ask some questions, and we're going to open it up to the audience as well for your all questions. We don't have a mic out, so we'll just ask you to stand up and speak a little bit so we can all hear the question. But with that, I will begin. And the first question, and I'll let everyone introduce themselves with the notion, not only who you are, but what was your entry into tech?
Hello, everyone. My name is Amelia Friedman, and I'm one of the co-founders at Hatch Apps. We've built a platform that enables small businesses and entrepreneurs to build mobile and web applications without coding. So kind of like a Squarespace, but for software. So my entry into tech. When I first moved here, I was actually doing work in language education, and was accepted into this program called Halcyon, which is a fellowship for social entrepreneurs, which Kari is about to start. At the time, I was not in tech at all. I was doing in-person language education programs, and that was my world. But I had this real interest in it. So I met a woman in New York, who was based in New York at the time, named Vanessa Dawson, who was helping female founders raise capital. She pitched me on trying to do something similar and launch something similar here in DC, which I didn't know anything about, and I just said, yes, let's do it. So I launched something here called the Vanetta Project, which helps female founders access capital, female tech founders. So that was really my entry, and through Halcyon, I met my now co-founder and started a tech company.
Carrie Clark. I am the founder of Uplift, which is an online coaching platform that helps working women navigate having kids. I started that back in January, and I before that I was at Google for 8 years, both on the marketing and the product management side. So I know a little bit about both starting a company and then also working at a big one. I got into tech, I guess it's a long time ago. I went to business school back almost 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, where I, before then, was doing something completely different. I was literally producing fashion shows. And one day I was like, you know what, I want to get into tech. I'm going to go to business school. And so I did. I went to Kellogg and just learned everything I could. I had no tech background. I was an art major. And I just learned everything I could about the startup scene and just completely immersed myself, and then landed an internship at Apple as a product manager. And from there, ended up working at Google. And I just think, what I love about tech is that it's a very accepting group, in the sense of you can have any type of background a lot of times, and if you just prove yourself, you can get into it.
Cool. All right. So hi everyone, my name is Shanaz Chowdhery. I'm the regional director for General Assembly. Raise your hand if you've heard of General Assembly. Awesome. All right. For those of you who don't know who we are or what we do, General Assembly is an education company that focuses on 21st century skills. And so our goal is to empower people to pursue the work they love by teaching them tech, business, data, and design skills. I broke into tech by stumbling into it. I was a 5th and 7th grade mathematics teacher in Southeast DC. I, like most sociology majors, raise your hand if you're a liberal arts major. Yeah, all right, cool. A few of us? All right, fair enough. Like most sociologists, I believe that education is the most powerful vehicle for economic mobility. That drove me to Teach for America. I was teaching in a small classroom in Southeast DC. I lasted about 6 months. I realized that I wasn't that great at working with children, and I didn't really, while I loved working in education, that I didn't really feel comfortable in the classroom. That led to me to kind of quit everything, my master's program, my teaching certification program, dropping out of TFA, I'm sorry to say. But ultimately, I stumbled upon General Assembly, started in inside sales, working as an admissions producer, became an admissions manager, got really into sales operations at what we call a tech company. And then today, for the last 2.5 years, I've been the regional director.
Awesome. So, one of the questions that we get oftentimes is, or one of the excuses we get oftentimes is when you challenge a founder or a company, whether or not, what is your diversity? How many women have you hired? And they often refer to it's a pipeline problem. I just can't find any women. Speaking to all of you all have had the experience, and Shanaz, I'm going to start with you. You see this right now. Tell me a little bit about on GA, kind of the makeup, the gender makeup, and then the placement thereof. And do you really see it as a pipeline issue?
Personally, no. I would argue that the pipeline issue or fallacy comes from just not looking in the right places, and it starts with everything from the colleges and universities that you might be recruiting from, as well as the just like other non-traditional sources of talent that you're looking for, and also a willingness to train and apprentice newcomers into the field and things like that. I can tell you at General Assembly, typically we have between 20 and 50% of our class is female. It does vary a little bit, course to course, I will say, but typically it's right around that 40% mark is our average, 40-60 split between females and males.
And do you see a placement issue of the 40%? Do they have a harder time, tougher time,
They
easier
have
time?
a easier time. It is great. And so for the companies that come, we don't really often have companies coming to us saying that they're having difficulty finding female talent because there's a whole group of them that we have here at GI. So if you're hiring, please come talk to me.
Amelia, I know you're hiring right now. And for a variety of different places. Do you actively recruit for women? Do you look at it as a consciousness, and has there been a pipeline problem?
We are super aggressive about recruiting in places where we think we can find women engineers. Pretty much exclusively like post and like women who code and reaching out to like DC to Femtech, and we've had a really hard time. I think that where we've really had trouble getting a lot of female applicants and reaching a lot of female engineers has been for more senior roles. And I don't know, I can only kind of speak from our experience. I don't know if it's that we're not looking in the right places, or, but from kind of some anecdotal experiences that I've had, it seems like there are a lot of there's a lot of effort to kind of get more women into engineering roles at the top of the funnel. We've certainly had a little bit of trouble finding senior engineers, or it's just it's something that we have to actively invest in order to find them. And yes, we are always hiring. So if anybody is looking for a role, always hiring.
Kari, you've worked at big tech. We'll put it in that context. Were you actively recruited, or were you were you an anomaly to be a woman there at Google?
So Google's really big, and so I would say that it's hard to make generalizations across. And what was nice being there for 8 years is I saw a lot of different areas. So I started in marketing, which was very female, and then moved over to product management, and product management on the hardware side in particular. And so that was the exact opposite, where it was very male. In fact, in my group of product managers, I think only 5% were female in that org. And so I think it differs over a lot of different places. But what I would say is there are some really strong, incredible pockets of women and very supportive technical women within the company. But it's not completely especially in something like hardware, which hardware is just more male-dominated in general.
And is that, I mean, I'll go back to Shanaz on that. Is that because of training, or is it just, women don't, there's not the role models there to kind of see like their advancement in that hardware? So is it cultural? Do you see a challenge on certain pockets where you're right, a lot of women get in tech go into the marketing side and not necessarily in the engineering? You're
I'm
training
one of them, right?
Yeah.
Like I work in a tech company, but I focus generally on operations and general management. I would say that there's a couple, I think, dynamics at play. I think that there are, like going all the way back to K through 12 education, we've all read the studies about how there are all sorts of different things that result in young women being discouraged from taking math and engineering classes, especially the higher level and more aggressive ones. And then that continues and kind of has its compounding effects over time. I do think that organizations like ours, as well as any like Women Who Code and all the really great meetups that are out there that are helping to widen at the top of the funnel, are helping with just like creating additional opportunities at the top of the funnel. But what I think is interesting is that up here we just said that we have a ton of junior talent, a lot of women who are really hungry to learn and ready to take the next step in their career. But Amelia is having issues finding more senior level talent for the positions that she's hiring for. And so the suspicion that I have is that not only do we have issues just like getting people into the top of the funnel, but once they're in the field, there are all sorts of reasons that we opt out. And I think we'll get into that.
Yeah, and actually it's a great segue because Kari, that's exactly kind of a little bit, talk a little bit about Uplift, and part of it is to bridge that gap or have the longevity of a person stay in their field. Talk a little bit about kind of some of the challenges and why women leave tech.
I mean, one of the things that you find is that women in like their mid-30s are actually leaving tech 4 times more than the like average of other industries. And I think a lot of that is because of something that's called the maternal wall bias, which is this idea that's right at the time when a lot of them are becoming moms. And around 60% of women actually experience some type of discrimination when they become a mom. And that could be, and they've actually done studies which showed where they took a resume and they like made one look like it was a mom and one who wasn't. And the one who wasn't a mom got twice as many callbacks and twice as many offers based on the exact same study. And in fact, the researchers were like, we've never seen biases this strong. And sort of what happens is that, and it's really, really tricky with the maternal wall bias because people might have really good intentions. So I had a manager who was a mom herself, completely supportive of women, and she didn't offer this new mom who was coming back a chance to take a new opportunity because she's like, there's too much travel. She's not going to want to do it. And like, honestly, that should not have been her decision. She should have offered it, and then that mom can be like, I don't want to travel. And it's these little tiny micro sort of like aggressions that happen that end up adding up and lead to people feeling that like becoming a mom can be a pinch point in my career. So that's one of the things that we do at Uplift, is try to like empower women to get in front of those conversations. So for example, in that situation, being able to have an upfront conversation with your manager, being like, I'm having kids, but I'm gonna go on leave, but if like a huge opportunity comes, I might be up for coming back a couple weeks early, or if there's something with a lot of travel, I might be up for it, but please offer that up to me. And having that proactive conversation with your manager can help a lot. So it's like, how do we sort of get around it by empowering women to make differences?
And Amelia, you have a male co-founder. Have you seen biases in places when you've gone to present, and whether it's assumed that you're not necessarily the co-founder as a woman? Have you run into biases yourself as you've gone out to be a leader in this field?
Yes. I would wonder, there are a lot of women in this room, have any of you had an experience where someone has assumed that you maybe were in marketing or you weren't in a technical role when you are? People make all sorts of crazy assumptions. And so for us, I feel like sometimes, for better or for worse, you kind of think about, okay, well, how can I, given the fact that we have a male and female co-founder, how do we kind of leverage how people are going to perceive us in our favor? And there are certain things that that my co-founder is just going to be better able to do, like, for example, like, have certain conversations with male investors. Even if I bring in the relationship, he's the closer, and that's fine and that's great. And Kari's going to change the world so that we don't have that anymore, and it's not going to be a problem. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely challenging. And then there are a lot of programs also that really discriminate against women, especially mothers. So, for example, right now we recently received a small amount of funding from Morgan Stanley, and they require that we travel back and forth to New York a lot. And I had said, well, listen, like, I'm happy to come to New York if there's a reason for me to be in New York, but I'm not going to be there just to, like, sit there. What's so interesting to me about kind of those types of experiences is that for a lot of, I mean, not even just women, but for people with families, a lot of these programs, these like Y Combinators, these halcyons, halcyon is a really interesting example because they give you housing, so they kind of, but it's just for you, it's not for your family. So they kind of assume that it's like these kind of young founders. But it's definitely something that in small ways and in large ways, I definitely feel that there are oftentimes kind of barriers that are put up and expectations of me and what my role should be and where I should go. And I feel like in a lot of those situations, it just feels uncomfortable to try and take it head on, and so we kind of conform, and I don't necessarily know what the best kind of approach for that is, but it's definitely been something we've struggled with.
And do you have a sense that, I mean, as a founder, and all of you, as a founder, what is the approach a founder should make for someone that does come in saying, I'm going to be leaving your company in 9 months, or I'm pregnant now, I'm going to be leaving? Is there a hesitancy on everybody's part to hire them and just say, you know what, it's too much, we're a high growth company, we're charging straight ahead, we don't have time to deal with this, and pass it over to the next person or to a male or others? Is there that natural bias? And how do you solve against it? Or what is the advice you would give to a founder to say, go ahead and take the chance with a woman that potentially has already even announced that she's pregnant or will be having a child soon?
I mean, yeah, on this, so a couple of points. One, I mean, my whole company was founded on this idea that I became much better at my job once I had kids. And they've done a lot of studies that when you have like major life changes, like having kids, it's a really good time to adopt new habits. And I've actually talked to now almost 100 women who are at the top of their fields who said they had this exact experience. So I only say that in the sense of like 2 points. One, that person that you give maternity, especially in a startup, will be so loyal in a way because they know what you invested in them. And then secondly, they're going to come back and do a kick-ass job. And so there's those pieces, but then it's tricky. And like, I've talked to lots of women. I talked to the CTO of Nest, who was, their third employee, and she found out she was pregnant. And 9 months before they were releasing their first product. So just do the math there. And so she was like, I didn't take maternity. And so like, I think that like, it is a little bit tricky depending on where you are and how it makes it work, but like, invest in those women, have those conversations, figure out how to make it work, because it'll pay off.
I think the challenge for startups of a certain size is that you have a lot of single points of failure. So like in a company like our size, we have 8 people full time. We have one person who is in charge of like this one thing, and if that person leaves for 3 months, then it's uniquely challenging. So it's definitely, I mean, we spend a lot of time thinking about like how do we as a startup fund maternity leave? How do we support that? How do we gap for it? And it's an active commitment that a company has to make. Like, we want to be a company where that's okay, and for us, we want that. That's something that we truly believe. Like, we want to support maternity leave. We don't want people to feel like they have to delay XYZ in their life until XYZ milestone happens with the company. That's just not gonna fly. So like you look at like how you can invest in certain types of there's ways to like leverage disability and use that to cover parts of maternity leave and like all these different things that you have to do. And it takes hours and it takes time and it takes a lot of attention, and it's not easy. But I do think it's really important for startups to make that commitment because, as you say, like that commitment will pay off. And so, it's a challenge.
Shanaz, you see students coming in, and you have for several years. Has the recent more, I guess, woke culture, Me Too, other things, has that been a deterrent for women to get into tech, or is that actually said, I'm going to get in there and prove everybody wrong?
I think that I'm not sure if the Me Too movement or like just kind of cultural awareness, increases in cultural awareness is necessarily widened the top of the funnel, but rather just opened up additional conversations and made it okay for us to talk about when things happen that just aren't okay, that otherwise I think we would brush off. I think it's also been relatively inspiring to young women in tech who may have run into issues and challenges or unfortunate circumstances in which they felt discouraged or they felt like they didn't belong, and acknowledging, like having just an open dialogue about the fact that these are experiences that we have all had, unfortunately, but that it's not a reason to choose to opt out. So I don't know if it actually has widened the funnel. It possibly could if you were looking to see if like tech is moving in the right direction or something like that, and that was stopping you from raising your hand, but I'm actually not sure, to be honest.
And I'm going to ask one or two more questions, and I'll open it up for the audience. On this, so it is said, or Peterson studies and others have said that women with 30% of their leadership, or 30% of a company's leadership that is female is actually 6% more profitable. So knowing, and we've seen this as an angel investor, we've seen this also when we invest in female founders, there actually is usually a higher return. Given the fact that it's actually more profitable to employ more women, what do you think is the biggest hesitation against it?
I don't know as much on the kind of hiring stats side, but in line with what you had just said, so only about 3% of venture capital goes to female CEOs, and 20% goes to gender diverse co-founding teams. So that means that 80% of venture capital goes to teams that are 100% all dudes. And on the other side of the coin, those companies that do have a woman on the leadership team are 30% more likely to generate revenue. So we're talking about pre-revenue companies, and generate 20% higher returns on investment. So like you look at every stat in the world, and they all say that it's good business. I think that when it comes to the kind of fundraising side, I mean, people want to look at a team and they want to say like, okay, like here's Mark Zuckerberg, here's Elon Musk, like here's Jeff Bezos, and like I'm never going to look like any of those guys, hopefully. So I think that that's a real challenge. And then when you look at the hiring side, I would wonder if it's a similar bias that you're hiring for your tech team, and you over your lifetime of experience, you're saying, great engineer, Mark Zuckerberg. That's the person you have in your head, white dude. And I mean, we're talking about women here, but there are all sorts of other kind of forms of discrimination that I think are all kind of emanating from a similar kind of bias of like, this is the person that I see in my head. And as we're hiring, we do that too, but we try not to gender it. We think about like what is this person good at? What is this person like? Where has this person worked before? And if you let enter into your mind just a little bit, like, oh, I know this other person that I've seen do it before looks like this and sounds like this and whatever, then it makes it harder to hire maybe somebody that is not that white dude.
If you guys are passionate about this topic, which being here, you probably are. Sarah Lacey wrote an incredible book called The Uterus is a Feature, Not a Bug, which just has like every stat in the world on this. It's amazing. Please just go read it. I think it's also an audiobook. But she cites a lot, and I don't know the numbers, that they did a bunch of research in Silicon Valley on like whether a lot of the men cared about this, and they just didn't. And they say they do, and then there's a blind survey and they don't. And so I think that's like, there's not, you hear that stat, but if things are already working for you, I don't know if like 6% is like that motivating to them.
Final question before I open it up to the audience. What does the tech world look like 50% female?
I mean, I'll start. I just think there'll be so many more ideas. Like, that's what I just think. Like, it's just, you'll be approaching it from so many different directions, so many different ideas, so many new things. I think that, the more people and the more diversity across whether it's male, female, race, any type of background, the more that we'll have.
I'm going to say productive and profitable. We know that working mothers and just any individual who has multiple commitments, both personally and professionally, becomes really good over time at just managing time effectively and efficiently. And we also know that women can drive more profitability for a company. And so I think productive and profitable.
For me, I think I agree with all that. And then I would also say that, women have a tendency to be a little bit more empathetic, which is great in terms of like team culture and collaboration and all of that, but also great in terms of product development, like really thinking about who your end user is and building better products.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
So I moved into, recently, I'm working for a startup, I moved into leadership, technical leadership role. And it's just hard. It's really hard. I don't have support, I don't have training. Some of the things that I expected of me are different, because if I behave like a man, I'm a bitch. I'm sorry to say that. Because they expect me to be more understandable or, softer or this or that, and I create sometimes this defensive image. And what I'm trying is like to prove my point. That's what it is. So these things, those rules, they exist. And I read books. Nice girls don't get corner offices and stuff. Like, I try to educate myself, but it's hard. It's hard. So if there are any groups that I can be part of, or if somebody who's doing these roles for sometimes can, give an advice, or there's some workshops or something, I'd like to know about them.
One thing I will say, so first of all, I just deeply empathize with your experience, and that it's really hard. I remember about a year and a half ago now, at a time where I was hitting all of my numbers and just like everything about the team and the organization was going so incredibly well. I got feedback that I was abrasive to work with, and that I wasn't playing well with others, and had to work on that in order to continue to be respected, and all of the charged and silly words that come out when you're trying to play like a man, but you're not really sure how, and there are all these unwritten rules. The best piece of advice that I have is, when that happened, I actually called my male mentor, and I asked him for advice on how he would handle this, and whether it was also BS, which it was. And acknowledging the BS and then thinking about, okay, like how do we actually address this feedback and what do we do? And having him kind of guide me through that process of how he would have approached it and thought about it was helpful in figuring out how to play the game. And then from there, I think that women just develop like coping mechanisms and figure out how to just play the game well. And that's the only way that I have been able to like come to terms with it, is acknowledging that this whole thing is a game that we just need to figure out how to navigate successfully. But that's my advice. Anyone else? Really great question, and also thank you for being a teacher. I would say there are a few different things. I think one, creating interesting opportunities for young female students to get exposed to tech, whether it's the basics of HTML and CSS, a cool robotics club, just like all of the different kinds of extracurriculars that we know take additional time and effort, but just create more entry points to get exposure, which may not be happening at home, especially in lower income communities that might not have access to a computer at home. Computer time in general is also really great for young students in general, but also for female students. The other thing I would say is being aware of just like all the small things that we do that we might not think about, right? Like telling someone that they, like incentivizing on the basis of you worked really hard at this as opposed to you're so smart. And like that's innate versus like working hard and continuing to incentivize on the basis of effort instead of innate ability is something that we need to drive home as a point specifically with our female students. Other things are like all of the minor, I think we call them microaggressions that we communicate to young female students when we say like you're gonna be so creative, or you should dive more deeply into English, or like all of those silly things that I'm sure you're very well aware of. But for administrators, I would say definitely just like kind of diving into those extracurriculars and figuring out additional entry points that are diverse.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, as a mother of a 5-year-old girl, I think just making it, and I think this is what you were saying, but just making it stuff that they care about. So like, you know, like maybe they're learning how to build something that like has something to do with fashion. And I know that's super stereotypical, but that's really what my 5-year-old cares about, you know? And like, if you made it pink, like she will really care about it. Like, it's like these silly things of like, can we actually just make it like, you know, like if we're doing robots, can we actually have some glitter? And I know that sounds very, very like stereotypical, but you're also dealing with that. And if you want to get diversity, a lot of times you might need to like have a wide range of things besides that.
Girls are also, they're less likely to be nominated for like GT programs and or gifted and talented programs in math and science, so, or just kind of other opportunities to further engage with the sciences and with tech. So I think as educators and as administrators, that's something to be very acutely aware of. Our teachers nominating women or girls for kind of gifted art classes and boys for gifted science classes, and is there a way to make sure that's not happening, and really draw attention to the fact that there should be real effort into finding avenues to get girls in to have more opportunities to really engage with the sciences and maths and tech when it becomes appropriate in the school level. So there are a lot of kind of more administrative things or kind of ways to word this or do that absolutely need to be happening on the administrative level. For you as a individual contributor, a lot of our hires come from in-network, and that's really problematic when you have an all-male engineering team, because who do these guys hang out with? Other guys. So, I mean, you're here today. Like, who are the women in here that could potentially be great hires for your company? How can you leverage your network and your connections to really bring women into the pipeline? And there's only so much control you can have over the process, but there is a fair amount of control you can have over the pipeline if you're really leveraging your network and the people that you know.
I would also add, from a process and kind of operational perspective, as you are starting the job, or starting the interview process, is thinking about the structure of the job description and making sure you're actively communicating how hopefully accommodating you are to working mothers and things like that. And there's like a lot of resources online that will like give you more information about how to do so really effectively. And then it's also thinking really critically about your interview team. Like, are the entry points primarily male? Is it just like this uncomfortable dynamic that you're creating for candidates in terms of just like that initial impression, and trying to figure out how to structure that interview process so that it's fair and inclusive as well. And then from there, I would also think about the way that you're communicating your culture. Are you communicating it in a way where you're putting forth that there's only one female on the team, or are you communicating it in a way that's like far more accepting and inclusive, and that you're trying to actually widen or increase the diversity of your team? So things like that, I think, could be helpful.
I don't know if everyone can hear, but she's basically saying there's a little bit of a backlash because now all of her male colleagues or friends are saying, what about the tech conference for men, or what about the tech opportunities for men? Because there's been so much emphasis recently on women and the emphasis to hire more women. So now you're having a little bit of backlash, or she's hearing backlash from men saying, well, wait about me? Yeah. I don't have a lot of patience for that. There's been too many centuries in which, I guess I'm not the panelist, so, but there's been too many centuries of that emphasis. We are just, when women are still only getting 2% of the funding of venture capitalists and 98% is going to non-female founders, we don't have a problem with funding male founders.
I have zero patience. I run a group for women, helping women get access to capital, and we do a lot to support that. Because as Penny said, it's a problem. And then we'll occasionally have a guy like, well, just to play devil's advocate, and I'm like, no, not even having this conversation, because the reality is, like, what percent for how many people are on an engineering team that is minority women? How many people are on an engineering team that is like half or majority women? Okay, we got one hand. That's awesome. Kudos to your company. It's such a prolific problem, and I think that if you're me, like, I would just say, well, like, here's the stats, and like, here's why this exists. And like, it'd be really problematic if there was, like, to use another example, when people talk about this similarly with affirmative action, like, if we had like, oh, like, here's the white people's group, there's a reason that doesn't happen, and it's the same thing.
Okay, one more question. Brotopia. Emily Chang.
I'm just going to put another plug in for the uterus as a feature, not a bug. It's like really insanely good. Sarah Lacey.
An interesting one of recently, just talking about more, is from the perspective of the Me Too, and just kind of the overall culture is Brotopia, from Emily Chang.
I've been following Sally Krawchuk. She just founded Elvest after being let go from 2 high-profile positions, and I found that like podcasts that feature female founders who have experienced like a diversity of experiences can be really inspiring and helpful. Harvard HBR has another great podcast. It's called HBR, I think, Women at Work. That was really great and had a lot of really just like good insight and feedback and advice.
Well, thank you all. I know the next panel is coming in, so we have to depart. But thank you all for listening, for being here, and appreciate the support.